Alright, so I thought I'd do a video on how to glue the edges of a sheet of carbon fiber for parts like bumpers, chassis, nerf wings, whatever, any of the parts you commonly find on a pan car, or sometimes shock towers for off-road cars and touring cars. Um, Essentially, you want to seal your edges with CA glue to keep them from delaminating in case you have a hard impact against the track barriers or some of the stuff you may run across racing on asphalt. Um, it also makes the car a lot easier to handle in the pits. You're less likely to get a carbon fiber splinter or anything like that. So it's not that hard to do. I recommend doing it if you're really bad about hitting the boards. So let's get started. First off, you're going to need CA glue, of course. I use Thin Zap. I've used it for years. You want to use a thin CA. Also, one thing that helps with the control is this little Teflon tubing. Sometimes you can find it at a hobby shop. It's usually over by like the airplane glues and things like that. And you just need a short piece. Gives you a lot greater control over where the glue's going. For sanding the carbon, I like to use 3M. I start with 220 and work my way down. Start with the 220, move on to 600. And then I move to what 3M calls polishing paper, which is actually a cloth with grit on it. It works really good for polishing. It's great at the track if you need to polish some parts like kingpins or whatever and don't want to make a mess with liquid polishes or whatever. I use the gray and the red when I'm doing carbon pieces. And it gives you like a really mirror-like finish. It's really glossy, almost looks like glass on the edge of the carbon. Another thing you can do, this is optional, if you want piano black edges on your carbon, go over the edges with a Sharpie marker after you sand. I don't do it personally. I like to be able to see the laminations in the carbon because with it polished at the high luster that we're going to do, it looks really cool. So to get started, if you notice I'm at a sink, you want to do all your sanding of carbon under water or under a stream of water. Carbon dust is really bad for your lungs, so as a safety precaution, you're going to want to wet sand. And so I'm just going to start out with the 220, and what you want to do is you want to sand all of the edges on the outside of the part to remove any rough edges, any high spots. Sometimes when they route the parts where the bit starts and stops, you have like a little ridge. The other thing you want to do is you want to take the corners off of the carbon, just knock them down so that they're not sharp. And what that's going to do is going to make the car a lot easier to handle in the pits and keep you from snagging a finger or getting a carbon splinter or whatever, because carbon splinters really suck. And they're also really hard to work out of your finger. Usually you just have to wait for your body to push them out. So I'm going to go ahead and wet sand the edges of this, and then I'll come back and we'll start the gluing process. Okay, now that our part's been sanded and dried, and that's very important, is make sure you get it nice and dry. Otherwise moisture can cause the CA glue to fog up when you're gluing the edges. There's two ways you can do this. One way is you can saturate a Q-tip with CA glue and run it along the edges. Sometimes I'll use that on the inner holes where it's hard to sand and get to. For the outside edges, I prefer to just run a bead of CA around the edge. If you use this Q-tip method, be careful. CA glue and the cotton can react together and cause fumes, and they will burn your eyes very badly. It's very irritable. I recommend this method over the cotton for that reason, or Q-tip rather, for that reason. And what you want to do is you want to put a drop of CA at the top edge, and it will run down with gravity, and it'll follow the part all the way down. And as you see the bead of glue start to be used up, just put a couple more drops of glue behind it and they'll feed down behind it. So I'm going to start right here, and you should be able to see the drop of glue follow the part down. Another drop, and you can see it flow down the side, gravity doing its job. And when you get to an edge, simply rotate the part and it will continue following the edge of the part. The surface tension is going to keep it on there, hopefully. If you do happen to have the bead run across the face of the part, it's not bad. Just take a rag and wipe it off quickly before it's dried. Another note is, if you end up with CA glue on the face of the part, or if you're really clumsy and glue your finger to it like some people I know, you can get dried CA off of the surface using acetone. Just plain acetone from like Beauty Supply. I guess they use it for removing fingernail polish or whatever. Stuff's cheap for a really big bottle. It's good to have around anyway for ungluing rubber tires, things like that, if you want to reuse inserts. And so basically run the bead all the way around, let it dry, and then what we're going to do is, once this is dry, we're going to sand it with the 6,000 or 600 grit, excuse me, sandpaper to smooth out the surface of the glue, and then we're going to hit a few more coats. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then we'll come back and sand it. Okay, so now that the glue's dry on the first coat, we can feel this nice and set up. We're going to take our 600 grit, and we're just going to smooth out the CA. Get rid of any where air bubbles might have been, or basically any high spots. We want it to be really smooth whenever we put the next coat of glue on. You don't have to go to this level of detail to get smooth edges. You could just put the coat of CA on there and just go. It doesn't look terrible, but I'm kind of a pit whore and like my car to look really nice. So if you can't be fast, look good, I guess. So gonna dry this off and go for another bead of glue, and we're gonna repeat this step about 2-3 times until we have a total of 4 coats of glue on the edge of the CA, or edge of the carbon, excuse me. It's been a long weekend. And then we'll move on to the polishing process. Okay, so we've got our 4 coats of CA on here, and it's pretty shiny as it is. I like to make it look like glass on the edge. So this is where our 3M polishing papers come into play. And just like with the sanding, you're going to go over the edges and just buff it. And basically with the gray, I just knock the shine off and try to get an even tone. And a lot of people say this is too much work for looks. But I like looking at somebody's chassis and saying, hey, this guy takes care of his stuff. You can tell a lot about how a car's treated by the way it looks sitting on the bench. Just going to do the front edge for now. That gives me a good base to start working with. Next, I'm going to take the red polishing paper and just do the same thing. And I mean, you're basically just working your way up through finer grits doing this. You could probably get away with doing this with really fine sandpaper. like 1,000, 2,000. The stuff that's almost like buffing with notebook paper. I'm getting a lot of the shine back doing this. And you can't see it in the camera, but it's very shiny, and you can start to see the laminations of the carbon through the glue. So the next step I'm going to do, and this is actually the last step, is I'm going to take a shop towel and some Mother's metal polish. Just put a little bit on there. Spread it a little bit. I'm going to buff the edges with the Mother's polish. I'm sure other polishes work, any metal polish or whatever. I have to give a little bit of elbow grease, but then take a dry part where there's no polish on the rag and buff it clean. You should really be able to see the carbon laminations through that. But you also have a really smooth finish on the edge of your carbon. And it's sealed, it's protected. And so here I have a piece that's sealed versus a piece that's not sealed. Not sure if you can really see that on the camera, but it looks amazing compared to just the stock plain finish carbon. And it'll withstand knocks a lot harder on the track. So that basically covers how to sand and seal carbon. So get out there next time you build a kit, sand your carbon, take care of it. Hopefully it'll last longer, and have fun.